Welcome to Data Myths Podcast with your hosts, Brian and Malinda Gagnon. In this episode, we're going to take a deeper look into artificial intelligence. I'm going to play the clip that I never played from the first episode. And then we're going to talk about how Google is winning the war in AI. You ready? Let's dive in. Hey, Malinda, how are you doing today? You ready for the podcast?
Absolutely. We're recording amidst a crazy snowstorm today, and it's nice to be tucked in with some tea and a mic.
Nice. Well, I'm glad that we could take the time to do this after making some ski turns this morning. So we're going to dive into a number of topics with AI, and Melinda's going to kind of lead the show today, and I'm going to kind of offer some commentary. So, Malinda, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So we wanted to jump in first thing in today's podcast with that clip that we mentioned last time. So this was back at CES when we were at a Techstars pitch competition. And to refresh your memories in case you hadn't seen the first podcast or it's been a little while, we were talking about AI and the skill sets needed to make it useful at a company. And part of what was debated was, what is the skill set needed? Do you need a PhD? Do you not need a PhD? What is the discipline that makes these activities valuable? So we wanted to play that for you and break it down a little bit and get more specific about what's being talked about with AI and what we saw.
Yeah, and what I would say is this was recorded out of the speakers at a conference, right? So audio quality's definitely live from the marketplace, so to speak. So let's take it away.
I guess from my perspective, unfortunately, the reality for us is that AI has become this kind of meaningless term within the industry, in the sense that if everyone is an AI company, then no one is actually truly an AI company, if you will. And what a lot of people have done is that they've said, oh, well, I use this little statistical analysis thing over here, or I do a little bit of machine learning out of the box, or whatever. I don't actually have. One, just as an aside, that we tell people a lot is that if you're trying to determine whether someone's actually an AI company, the first test is to try and see whether what percentage of their staff actually has PhDs and has PhDs in a relevant field. Because if the answer is zero, they are not an AI company, just almost by definition, right? And so even media agencies and advertising agencies pitch these days their AI capabilities, which is just sort of a ludicrous kind of thing on some level.
So really interesting, and if you listen to that, you would think that, like I spoke on the last podcast, this is sort of the wedding photographer that's getting mad at the folks that are taking out their iPhones and taking some really great iconic pictures. Sounds to me like there's a little bit of competition there, and that trying to find relevance by how many smart people that they have trying to solve a problem. What are your thoughts, Malinda?
Well, it's really a matter of what makes something useful for a consumer. There's certainly a need to have trained, intelligent people, and if that takes a PhD to accomplish that, then so be it. We have to know what AI is doing for us. We have to know with machine learning, the models being used and why decisions are being made the way they are. That's essential, because without that transparency, this black box is not going to be beneficial in the long run. So that is certainly true. However, to create something of value, you really can have a more diverse set of skills.
Well, and what I would say is from our time in Montreal at the AI conference or the neural networks conference, one of the things, what did we interview? 10 people there? Most of those folks were PhDs and they were, astrophysics smart. But when we asked them questions about solving even the most basic problems in business, they fell off the map pretty quick with the understanding of actually applying the math to the problem.
And that's why it's so interesting when we, think about topics within AI. Of course, there are so many you can't even count them all, but applied AI is one, and that's absolutely why, because we need these incredibly intelligent people just inventing and working away in their laboratory, so to speak. You also need the people who understand the consumer, the business need. When you have those people come together, that's when the really cool stuff happens.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, right? Many of the most iconic companies in the tech space have been built by people that dropped out of school, didn't have a PhD, and developed some really cool technology. And I think the same is going to be true here. Sure, a lot of the big players, Microsoft, IBM, you name it, Google, there is a bit of a PhD war going on, but we haven't seen a ton yet from the fruits of that labor just yet. And I think that there are a lot of others that are definitely innovating with, whatever they can to, produce results.
Absolutely. So that's great context for this next question. So Brian jumps in, everybody, with this question, and we can hear the response.
Hi there, guys. My name is Brian Gagnon, Economic Data. Big question. I was at NeurIPS a few weeks ago. 3,200 people, up from 300
In Montreal.
in Montreal. Hey. And my favorite part, and actually a challenge to both of you. So you said the number of PhDs that you have on staff is equational to how awesome your AI is. And so before that, Diane Green, before she actually moved on away from Google, basically said, hey, listen, there are thousands of people that can do the math in the world. There are tens of thousands of people that can build the model from the math. We need to make it so that millions of people can actually do AI. My challenge to you, and actually comment on it, is the whole goal of this is to build TensorFlow, build things like that where you can actually build a company without having a PhD. Care to discuss?
Okay, so as you kind of heard there, being an old VMware guy, I would follow Diane Green anywhere. She's incredibly sharp. And one of the things, about a week before she was either moved on or moved on from Google, she really, stuck her flag in the ground and said, hey, listen, machine learning, it really needs to become prevalent so that all different sorts of companies can take advantage, right? And until we get that level of ease, true innovation is not going to happen because that friction is too much. And so what we have is every company saying, hey, I do AI. Well, that's fantastic, but what are you actually doing where you're actually solving like a real problem where it's not just, very low lying or low level, awareness or benefit.
And the next clip that we want to play is continuing on this discussion around what is an AI company, how do you make sense out of that, and we'll hear from a couple folks. Again, it's the same discussion with this Techstars pitch competition. The second speaker is the head of AI for Techstars and just talking about, who they include in their programs. And let's face it, with an organization like that grappling with these questions, they're leading the space in terms of where this is all headed. So I think that's a particularly interesting point of view.
Well, and you know what I would say before we get to that clip is that, if you think of the Google experience and what they're going after to build and solve, it's to create that infrastructure that's in place so that people can easily solve some of these problems that have been haunting us, right? Whether it be, you know, the dialogue engine or the dialogue flow, right? There's a number of different ways that they're solving or creating an infrastructure for companies to solve problems.
So I think it would probably be useful for a lot of our listeners if you broke that down a little bit and explained what Google rolled out. What was it, 2 months ago at this point? That's really pivotal. So if you could break it down, I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, and so there's a number of things, and we'll keep it really high level. So dialogue flow is really a big piece of the puzzle, right? And so dialogue flow is this engine that allows you to create, whether it be chatbot, whether it be voice, whether it be even a IVR phone system, you can create the smarts behind that from one framework. It took me, I did one for one of our clients. It took me about 15 minutes to have a sample voice experience where someone could call in on their cell phone and be able to ask questions and get smart answers, all from artificial intelligence, right? So that bar has become incredibly low. Now, having the data set and the answers, right, to those questions, that's going to take time, and analysis, but we're getting there, and we're getting there really quickly. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Another piece of the puzzle is making TensorFlow, which is one of the key pieces to machine learning, making that really available and easy to implement. And I think that they've hit it out of the park. I mean, you can look at a stash of images and find similarity in those images with 6, maybe 8 lines of code if you're really talented. That's pretty amazing.
And I think what we're seeing certainly is, Google is betting on the fact that these tools have to be ready for, I don't want to say the everyday practitioner, but really democratizing AI. So creating this tool set essentially that empowers people to use this technology and explore what it can do. And when we think about how you can use these tools, it's important to think about, the process of ideation, exploration, and then actually building, whether it's your prototype, your, first project, whatever that may be. If you want to ideate and explore something, use these tools, play around with it. Well, when you're about to test it with a client or bring it to market, well, then maybe you need to get some of those heavy hitting PhDs in there to peel it back and shoot holes in it. But the fact that this can start to happen without that expertise in house right out of the gate is really powerful. And we're going to start seeing the innovation curve really, really accelerate.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, let's just play the last little bit of dialogue. This is between the last two panelists. I do think that their approach was a lot softer than the first guy. I thought he, quite honestly, was maybe a little bit arrogant, right, about his background and such. I don't really know, but that was sort of my take, and I just kind of glossed over it. But let's dig in. Let's listen to the last clip.
So agree with the broad point, which is like people talk a lot in the industry about trying to democratize the technology, democratize things. And so I think companies like Google with TensorFlow, Microsoft with Azure, and a lot of the machine learning stuff that they have there, they've actually put this technology now, broadly speaking, into like lots of people's hands. The part of the challenge that still exists is that it's not just having the technology, it's actually knowing which models to use for which sorts of things, what kind of data to pull into it, and so on. And the industry at large is continuing to kind of make strides in that regard. So when So when I was talking earlier about kind of everyone is an AI company on some level, I actually do believe that AI elements will permeate literally every single type of software, every type of interaction going forward, such that on that level it's sort of meaningless. Then the question just becomes is, are you an AI supplier of that sort of technology, or are you an AI consumer of that technology? And if you're going to position yourself as a supplier of the technology, then you need to have the kind of talent to back it up. If you're going to be a consumer of it, I think as time goes on, lots of different people are going to be able to use it in lots of ways. And we're actually doing a lot in terms of enabling tools and so on for ourselves in terms of how it is that you make that much more accessible to people who are not even developers, but like designers and marketers, so that they can readily build experiences.
I like how these guys finished this out, right? It was, they really sort of rounded out the discussion. And this is why I love a good panel. What were your takeaways?
I thought the topic was addressed really completely. It was a really great group of people to speak to this. And a lot of times with panels, it kind of glosses things over and is really high level. The thoughtfulness of the conversation was great. So I was pleasantly surprised with it. But again, I mean, hey, I will say I'm a huge fan of Techstars, so the bar is high for them, for me anyway. But they certainly put together a great panel.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to going up to Montreal and having probably some apps with these guys. Hopefully with something bacony goodness in Montreal.
Absolutely, beer, poutine, talking startups and AIs. What could be a better time than that?
Nice. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about bias, right? And AI bias. And I think that, there's been a lot of topics about this. I know that Harvard and MIT have both done studies and how bias is affecting everything from African Americans, the white light skin versus the dark skin, and that AI is 35% more likely to not understand you if your skin is darker than lighter. That's a pretty major number versus 1% if you're Caucasian. That's major.
Absolutely, and that study that you're mentioning, it not only showed racial bias but also gender bias. So it's an example of the fact that in the data sets that we're learning from, and the people who are creating these models are primarily white and primarily male. So in this study, they looked at facial recognition, and as you said, 35% of images for darker skinned women had errors, whereas it was 1% for lighter skinned males. So it's definitely compounded, and it's twofold. It's the data that we have to work with, and the people who are creating this technology.
Well, and what I would say, right, is there's a separation between the machine learning part, that is looking at the data set and coming up with inferences, and then there is the artificial intelligence, which actually takes that and does something with the learnings. We're in control of both parts of that, but the AI and what we do with the knowledge is really key. And I think, that takes more than just a data scientist and someone with a PhD in math.
What we've chatted a lot about is how do we start to create some conscious structure around how we're approaching some of these challenges, so we can start to unwind this bias. Now, from the data sample perspective, that's a little tougher, because if the data is not there, it's hard to just invent data, right? But we can start to be conscious of, okay, do we have a representative sample? that will allow us to learn what we need to learn. We also need to think about who's coming to the table to ask questions, to look for solutions to certain problems. And to do this really well, it's really going to take a multidisciplinary approach.
So I'm interested to see where liberal arts plays in. I never thought I would say this, but I'm going there. Where liberal arts actually plays into artificial intelligence and how we're building the algorithms, right? Because I look at this where we are now crossing emotional barriers, we're crossing, anthropology type problems and historicals, we're crossing economic and societal problems and environmental challenges. We're crossing a lot of different barriers with artificial intelligence really quickly here. And what is our understanding of the world? It's more than just math, and it's more than just the algorithm, really.
And that's when it comes to the point that this is asking such important questions. I mean, we're testing out AI for bail bonds questions, or looking at how we could predict sentencing, for example, if someone is likely to be a repeat offender. Now, granted, we're not to the point where the machines are making these decisions, but we're looking for this guidance, right? So these are, to say it's deeply human is an understatement. This affects people's lives. It affects how people are treated. And you have to look at it from an ethical and social context, or else it's just going to be absolute mayhem.
Well, and getting it wrong when you say, "Hey Siri, what are the directions to the latest, and greatest burger bar in my area?" If it gets that wrong, nobody dies. If it gets, whether or not someone, might be eligible for parole or eligible for a promotion or a job, that's a whole different problem. And I mean, I just read an article the other day where Amazon has actually stopped using their artificial intelligence for potential promotions or interview candidates, because what they were finding is that in this industry of predominantly males, we saw it at CES. There was probably five guys for every one woman, and that's going to be representative in where people's roles in the past have been. And if you build a model on predicting somebody's potential job future and who might be the best candidate, well, the guy or the male is probably going to rise up to the top just based on past experience. That has no bearing on capability.
And humans are certainly imperfect. We have conscious, unconscious bias as human beings, but to just be conscious of what these very intelligent machines are telling us is obviously the first step, and we can continue to work to solve it.
Yeah, and where do we go from here? So what's the next step? Is it transparency in the algorithm? Because when I log into LinkedIn or Facebook, actually, I don't log into Facebook because I don't have a Facebook account. I feel like a Luddite a little bit. But when I log into those things and the algorithm changes, and all of a sudden I start to see things in my news feed that weren't there before, I don't really know what changes they've made. I don't really know what changes Google made when I went and typed a search in the search bar, right? Does transparency of algorithm help with AI and making it more accurate and more understandable? This stuff is all just so fascinating to me. And, I really want to just hit the last bit of the clip and the sound bites that we captured from the Techstars panel, because I think the last little bit, as they were still answering my initial question, I think we got into some really great stuff. And this feeds into a little bit, Malinda, what you've been talking about with the different disciplines and biology and economics and psychology and anthropology and how that feeds into AI. Let's give it a listen for a minute.
That was actually a point when we were doing the company selection for Techstars, where we were trying to figure out, so this is an AI-focused program. Do we need the PhD on each team? Like, what's an AI company? Do they need to do it themselves, or are they just using off-the-shelf tools and applying this in a product that would not exist without AI? Is that some company we should select? The answer was yes. Some companies in our class did not have a PhD. And some did. And actually thinking about it, some did, but not in the topic, not in machine learning, not in deep learning. Some company was doing drug toxicity screening, and the PhDs were biology, drug development, and these things, not deep learning. Another one was in doing brain MRI scans analysis to detect early signs of dementia, and the PhDs we wanted to see in that team was a neuropsychiatrist, not a deep learning expert. So yes, I think like 2-3 years from now, even more so than today, just like early on when cloud came in, like you needed people to really understand the tech, and now there's so many tools where you don't even need to understand what's happening and where the hardware is and what even a RAID driver is anymore, but there's redundancy in your data, and you have it. So I think at some point we'll get there with data, where you don't need to understand how it actually works, but you're applying it.
Transparency is going to be absolutely key. And I realize that probably makes a lot of tech companies absolutely shudder, because these models, these algorithms are part of their secret sauce. But if people don't know why they're seeing what they're seeing, there's no learning that happens. So a company can gain a lot from getting that user feedback. And it's impossible if they don't know, like, well, why isn't it working? Or why am I seeing what I'm seeing? And the other piece to it is the more that we can have this multidisciplinary approach, and this starts, I mean, in everyone's education. I would, love to see it as early as possible, but definitely when people get into college, to have as many people as possible exposed to computer science and exposed to the building blocks of AI, so they understand, well, these are also the tools of my trade, whether I'm in biology or the social sciences, or even studying English literature. These tools can help you understand your field. And once people know the research tools that they have at their disposal, not only are they just more informed and can understand what's happening, but they can start to participate in this wider conversation about context, social and ethical issues, and it's going to elevate the work overall.
Yeah, and in talking to a few folks that lead college departments that are really starting to focus out past the math, right? One of the things that they've been talking about is exactly that, getting the English major and helping them understand Python and how they could take a bunch of different, whether it be essays or something like that, and reading them in and looking for word comparisons or what have you. These are all things that, might be able to use something like Python or, PySci or whatever, to actually show differences or things that they may not have ever looked at before. And I think it's very interesting that is starting to happen. Let's shift gears a little bit, because there's a debate that I've been having and thinking about, which is, I know we talked about what Google is building and what Google has built. And what I would say is I've read a lot of basically analysis on Diane Green's departure from Google. One of the things that I would say is, she was kind of tasked with building out their cloud, and catching up with Amazon AWS. But, they didn't make an appreciable gain from a percentage standpoint for the actual, cloud applications, the traditional, move a virtual appliance or instance to the cloud. However, they did spend billions of dollars building out this whole machine learning and AI infrastructure. Where's Amazon on that stuff? Do we know? I mean, I haven't seen anything from them. And, now that Diane Green has built this amazing platform and moved on, I feel like Google is really well positioned to own that space. And I feel like the next third generation of web applications that are going to be all AI are definitely going to be leaning towards Google because they've built out this whole infrastructure. And while AWS has been great, they've been going after the legacy while Google's been over here building, .next. And I think that's going to be pretty powerful.
Google is absolutely building for the future, and it's really interesting to see, and it ties in to exactly what we were talking about in our last podcast of how Google Assistant, Hey Google, was everywhere. Alexa was not. This is part of that really expansive ecosystem that Google's building and positioning them to be a leader in voice because they have all of these AI tools. They have email, they have cloud, they have even hardware. I mean, they're controlling that space, and that will allow them to make it work better than what anyone else is able to do.
Yeah, and I would say I want to talk more about voice because it's just so relevant right now, but I think that is going to be a whole episode or two all by itself. So, in fact, let's make that our next episode. We're going to dig into voice hardcore.
Cool.
But let's just wrap it up just a little bit in that I think that it's more than the marketing engine that happened at CES. I think when you really start to think about what Google is doing and what Amazon is not, when you go to the Google infrastructure, it's going to integrate a lot more tightly, in a very Apple way with everything that's sort of in your life. If you have Google Apps or, an Android phone, etc., it's going to integrate a lot tighter. If you look at Amazon, their phone died. That was a quick and painful death. They don't really have any apps, so to speak. I'm sure they've got the cloud, kind of propping up their bottom line. And sure, they've got Alexa, but, outside of listening to some music and maybe playing Jeopardy, I don't know where they're going with that, right? And I see, from my perspective, I see Google coming on strong, having integrations with Spotify, having integrations with their Google, apps and such, and their phones. That's a pretty big market all to itself. And when that all ties together, that's going to make a whole other podcast for us to talk about. So what do you want to cover? What do you want to cover last? I think we're getting to the point of top of the hour here. Is there anything else you want to cover?
No, I think overall that if you're listening and you're like, hey, I want to learn more about this stuff, please do it. We need more people to jump into this space and follow what's going on and think about it and think about how these tools can help with literally everything that we think about and study. That's going to help us all develop cool new things and elevate the work overall.
Yeah, I actually just thought of one more thing that one more topic I wanted to cover, and that is input bias versus output bias. And like we were having that conversation, we had a conversation this morning about basically someone, in a polling situation where they ask, hey, how was something in your life today? Was it good? And they sort of lead that question a little bit into the answer they're hoping for. That's sort of the input bias. AI is a little bit more focused on the output bias, which is it asks you a question, you give an answer, and then it maybe gives you some result that it thinks you're after. Talk a little bit about that if you don't mind. I mean, I've been thinking about it quite a bit, but there really is two problems there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the data set. It's what we have to learn from, and it's the model that's used to actually look at it and surface a result or information. So it's twofold. So when we're looking at this bias question, you've got to look at it from both angles, and both are not easy to solve, but you can't solve it without both pieces.
So in 2020, is discovery going to be dead? Is everything in our lives going to be curation because the AI is going to lead us down paths every time we ask it something?
I really hope not, because that will turn us all into robots. We won't do anything new. We won't learn anything different. We won't discover really awesome new hobbies or books to read, or, just think about that. If everything you're served up in your life is because of other people that look like you, other people that, consume information like you, I mean, how awful. I really hope not.
I think we need to have the I'm feeling lucky button, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Roll the dice, try something new.
You get in the autonomous car and you hit the I'm feeling lucky button, and somehow it drives you to the nearest casino or something.
Yeah, exactly. Drive me to a place I am highly unlikely to go. I think that would be awesome.
Nice. Some of our friends from New York City that came up to visit us in the woods, they kept saying, oh my goodness, we're driving up the mountain when we were driving down a dirt road. I think they would probably be uncomfortable with the autonomous car that just took them to the place they hadn't been.
Sure, but they had one hell of a time with us, So, case in point.
That's true. So maybe curation, won't be the only option, and maybe discovery will live on. I mean, that's my hope, right? It's, but I think about things like voice versus visual, right? Or traditional search. Traditional search, you put in and say, show me some vacation options. You get what? You get 10 on the first page and maybe 4 or 5 ads of people that are really vying for your attention. That's like 14 different options that you have all in one quick fell swoop. Voice, if you say, hey, show me a cool vacation, you're probably going to get what? Maybe, or what are you going to listen to? Maybe 2, maybe 3. But after that, I'm not going to sit around and just keep listening to the thing read off. Do you want choice 1? Do you want choice 2?
Yeah, I know. Absolutely. I mean, it's the convenience factor, that whenever you have convenience, you're sacrificing more complete anything. So you just have to be the judge of when it's worth it to be inconvenient, but be in the driver's seat more.
Nice. Well, I want to actually have a whole other discussion about curation versus discovery on a later podcast. I think that is really interesting, and I'd like to dig into that more. But let's wrap this up. Do you have any final parting thoughts or words on everything we've covered today?
No, just what I said before. Jump in.
So it's getting to be that time where we have to wrap this up. And what I would say is this has been one heck of an episode. We've been all over the place. We've covered AI bias, and really some perspectives on AI from that panel at CES. I'm still blown away. We could probably dig into that and have 3 more episodes just on some of the conversation that we had out of that. But we'll hold back and we'll mix in some other pieces. We talked a little bit about voice. We talked about what Google's plans are, and how they're really starting to build the foundation in that space. And We also talked about bias and a little bit about curation and versus discovery, right? And how AI fits into that. And so I think we've got a lot of great topics for future podcasts that we're going to hit on. But now is that time. So let's wrap it up. So I'd like to end and say thank you very much to Infonomic Data for sponsoring this, buying us all the great gear to make a hopefully quality podcast. I think we're getting better. I'd also like to thank Malinda for joining on. This has been great banter. I hope that we get to be better podcast hosts. We're also looking forward to bringing a number of people on the show, so that will be fun. And we'd like to thank all of you for following along. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. We have all of those properties. Datamyths.com. Also, you can go and see our latest podcast, a couple more podcasts, and we will be syndicated across all of the different platforms. So join along, and we're looking forward to the next episode. Thanks for listening.